Caroline Leavitt was not your ordinary lawyer. At just 28 years old, she had already made a name for herself in the legal world. Her journey to becoming an attorney wasn't easy. She worked multiple jobs while studying law at night, often sacrificing weekends and holidays to chase her dream. But Caroline knew what drove her, the desire to give a voice to those who felt powerless. She believed that the law could be a tool for good, a way to protect people from injustice. And now, standing in front of a crowded courtroom, she was ready to prove it once again. This time, however, the stakes were higher than ever before. The case revolved around a small community that had been devastated by pollution caused by a massive corporation. For years, residents had complained about contaminated water and toxic waste dumped near their homes, but no one listened. The company, behind it all, denied any wrongdoing and used its deep pockets to silence critics. That's where Caroline came in. A group of local activists had reached out to her after hearing about her previous victories against big businesses. They begged her to take on their fight, and despite knowing how tough it would be, Caroline agreed without hesitation. On the morning of the trial, Caroline arrived early at the courthouse. She carried a stack of files filled with evidence, scientific reports, witness statements, photographs of polluted rivers, and medical records showing the health impacts on residents. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed whispers among the other lawyers and court staff. Some admired her dedication. Others dismissed her as too young and inexperienced to handle such a high-profile case. Caroline ignored them. She had learned long ago that doubters only fueled her determination. When she entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. On one side sat representatives from the corporation, dressed in expensive suits and exuding confidence. Opposite them were members of the affected community, ordinary men, women, and children whose lives had been turned upside down. Their faces showed a mix of hope and anxiety. Caroline smiled reassuringly at them before taking her place at the plaintiff's table. The judge entered moments later, and everyone stood up. Judge Harold Grayson was a towering figure with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. Known for his strictness and impatience, he had earned a reputation as someone who didn't suffer fools lightly, or so he claimed. What many people didn't realize was that beneath his stern exterior lay a deeply flawed personality. Over the years, several attorneys had privately accused him of bias and unprofessionalism, but none dared to speak publicly for fear of retaliation. As the proceedings began, Caroline rose to deliver her opening statement. Her voice was steady and clear as she outlined the case. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge directly, "this is not just about holding a corporation accountable. It's about protecting families who have suffered because of greed and negligence. These are real people whose lives have been shattered." She gestured toward the gallery where the community members nodded in agreement, but Judge Grayson wasn't impressed. Before Caroline could finish, he interrupted her, mid-sentence. "Miss Leavitt," he barked, leaning forward in his chair, "do you really think this court has time for dramatic speeches? Stick to the facts if you can manage that." Caroline paused, taken aback by the sudden hostility. She glanced at the jury, then back at the judge. "I apologize, Your Honor," she replied politely, "but I believe it's important to set the context for why we're here today." Grayson rolled his eyes dramatically. "Context? Spare us the theatrics. You're here to present evidence, not write a novel." The comment drew a few chuckles from the defense team, but Caroline refused to let it rattle her. She continued, calmly, laying out her arguments one by one. Yet every time she spoke, Grayson found another reason to criticize her. He mocked her use of visual aids, calling them childish. He questioned her interpretation of scientific data, implying she didn't understand it. At one point, he even accused her of wasting the court's time by repeating information that, in his opinion, was irrelevant. By the end of her presentation, Caroline felt drained. It wasn't just the constant interruptions, it was the tone of the judge's remarks. There was something almost personal about the way he attacked her, as though he resented her very presence in his courtroom. Still, she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about her ego or pride. It was about the families counting on her to make their voices heard. Meanwhile, in the back row of the courtroom, Pam Bondi watched silently. A seasoned veteran of the legal system, Bondi had seen her fair share of difficult judges. But something about Grayson's behavior struck her as unusual. His comments weren't just harsh, they were calculated to undermine Caroline's credibility. Bondi leaned forward slightly, narrowing her eyes as she observed the scene unfold. She recognized talent when she saw it, and Caroline Levitt clearly had potential. But more importantly, Bondi sensed that this trial was about to take a turn neither side anticipated. As the morning session drew to a close, Grayson announced a short recess. Caroline returned to her seat, exhaling deeply as she flipped through her notes. One of the community leaders approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Don't let him get to you." Caroline forced a smile. "I won't," she promised. But deep down she wondered how much longer she could endure the judge's relentless attacks. Little did she know, help was closer than she thought, and justice was about to take a surprising twist. The recess did little to ease the tension in the courtroom. Caroline sat at her table, reviewing her notes and trying to steady her nerves. The judge's words still echoed in her mind, gnawing at her confidence. She reminded herself that this wasn't about her. It was about the people counting on her to fight for them. But it was hard not to feel shaken when someone in a position of authority seemed determined to belittle her every move. When the session resumed, Caroline stood up again, ready to present more evidence. This time, she focused on a series of expert testimonies from scientists who had studied the environmental impact of the corporation's actions. Their findings were damning: polluted water sources, increased rates of illness among residents, and long-term damage to the ecosystem. As she spoke, she noticed some members of the jury nodding along, clearly moved by the gravity of the situation. But Judge Grayson wasn't interested in science or facts. Within minutes, he interrupted her again, this time with even sharper criticism. "Miss Levitt," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "perhaps you should have brought a textbook instead of wasting our time with these charts. Do you honestly expect us to believe you understand what they mean?" Caroline froze for a moment, stunned by the sheer dismissiveness in his tone. She glanced at the jury, then back at the judge. "Your Honor," she replied evenly, "these reports are from highly qualified experts. If you'd like, I can provide additional clarification." "Oh, spare me," Grayson snapped. "You're not here to teach a class. Just get to the point, or better yet, let someone else handle this case if you're incapable." The comment hit like a punch. Caroline felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she refused to let him see how much his words stung. Instead, she took a deep breath and continued, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I assure you, Your Honor, I am fully capable of presenting this case. These findings are critical to understanding the harm caused to the community." Grayson leaned back in his chair, shaking his head theatrically. "Capable? Miss Levitt, your performance so far suggests otherwise. Perhaps you should consider a different line of work, one that doesn't involve standing before a court." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that Grayson had crossed a line. It wasn't just criticism anymore. It was outright humiliation, and everyone could see it. Some spectators exchanged glances, whispering quietly among themselves. One elderly woman in the gallery shook her head in disbelief, muttering under her breath, "This isn't right." In the back row, Pam Bondi's expression darkened. She had been watching closely since the trial began, and now she was certain. Judge Grayson wasn't just being tough. He was targeting Caroline personally. His comments weren't constructive feedback. They were calculated insults designed to undermine her authority and credibility. Bondi clenched her fists, her instincts telling her that something needed to be done, and fast. Back at the plaintiff's table, Caroline struggled to maintain her composure. Each insult felt like another weight pressing down on her shoulders. Yet she refused to give up. She reminded herself why she had chosen this path in the first place. Her clients, the families sitting anxiously in the gallery, were counting on her to stand up for them no matter how difficult things got. Giving up wasn't an option. Determined to push forward, Caroline introduced her next piece of evidence: photographs of the polluted river that ran through the heart of the affected community. The images were striking: murky waters filled with debris, dead fish floating near the shore, and children playing dangerously close to the contamination. These photos illustrate the real-world consequences of the defendant's negligence, she explained, projecting the images onto a screen for everyone to see. But Grayson wasn't impressed. In fact, he seemed annoyed by the visual presentation. "Really, Miss Levitt?" he sneered. "Do you think showing us pictures will change anything? Save the photo album for your family reunion." The comment drew nervous laughter from a few corners of the courtroom, but most people remained silent, too uncomfortable to react. Caroline, however, didn't flinch. She simply turned off the projector and moved on to her next argument. Inside, though, she was seething. How could someone entrusted with upholding justice behave this way? As the afternoon wore on, Grayson's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He dismissed key pieces of evidence as irrelevant, mocked Caroline's arguments, and repeatedly accused her of wasting the court's time. At one point, he even suggested that she might face sanctions for contempt if she didn't shape up. By now it was clear to everyone in the room that this wasn't a fair trial. It was a spectacle, with Caroline caught in the crossfire of the judge's wrath. Finally, during a brief pause in the proceedings, Pam Bondi decided it was time to act. She had seen enough. Quietly rising from her seat, she approached the bailiff stationed near the door. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "I need to speak with someone immediately. This is urgent." The bailiff raised an eyebrow but nodded, leading her to a private area where she could make a phone call. Once alone, Bondi dialed a number she knew by heart. On the other end of the line, a trusted colleague answered. "Listen carefully," Bondi said, her voice low but commanding. "We have a serious issue in courtroom 4. The presiding judge is engaging in blatant misconduct. I've witnessed it firsthand, and I'm documenting everything. Get me connected with the Judicial Conduct Commission right away. I'm filing a formal complaint." While Bondi worked behind the scenes, the trial continued. Grayson, oblivious to the storm brewing outside his courtroom, doubled down on his attacks. During a particularly heated exchange, he leaned forward on his bench, glaring at Caroline. "Let me make one thing clear, Miss Levitt. You're out of your depth here. Maybe you should stick to simpler cases like traffic violations or parking tickets. Wouldn't that suit you better?" The insult cut deep, but Caroline refused to show weakness. Looking directly at the judge, she responded calmly. "Your Honor, my goal is to ensure justice is served, not to entertain personal opinions. I'll continue presenting my case unless instructed otherwise." Her poise only seemed to infuriate Grayson further. He slammed his gavel on the desk, shouting, "Enough. If you cannot conduct yourself professionally, I will hold you in contempt. Is that what you want?" At that exact moment, the courtroom doors swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, scanning the room before approaching the judge's bench. Whispers rippled through the gallery as everyone tried to figure out what was happening. Grayson frowned, irritated by the interruption. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Judge Grayson, we have orders to escort you out of the courtroom. Please come with us." For a split second, there was complete silence. Then chaos erupted. Spectators gasped, reporters scrambled for their notebooks, and the defense team exchanged panicked looks. Grayson stared at the officers in disbelief. "On whose authority?" he sputtered. "Pam Bondi's," the officer replied simply. And just like that, the man who had spent hours tearing down Caroline Levitt was led away in handcuffs, leaving the courtroom and the entire legal community in shock. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, Caroline felt a wave of relief wash over her. She looked toward the gallery, meeting the eyes of the community members she represented. They smiled at her, gratitude shining in their expressions. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel hope. Justice, it seemed, still had a chance to prevail. The courtroom was in complete disarray. The sight of Judge Harold Grayson being led away in handcuffs left everyone stunned. Lawyers, jurors, spectators, and even the bailiffs exchanged bewildered glances. It was as though the very foundation of order had been shaken. No one could remember a time when something like this had happened. Judges were supposed to be untouchable pillars of authority, not individuals subject to arrest in the middle of a trial. And yet there he was, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, protesting loudly as the officers escorted him out. Caroline Leavitt stood frozen at her table, unsure of what to do next. Her mind raced with questions. What did this mean for her case? Would the trial continue? Was this all some bizarre nightmare she would wake up from? But amidst the confusion, a small part of her felt a flicker of vindication. For hours she had endured relentless insults and attacks from the judge, and now justice seemed to have intervened, not just for her, but for everyone in that room who had witnessed his misconduct. In the back row, Pam Bondi remained calm and composed, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. She knew exactly what she had set in motion. As soon as she filed the emergency complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission, she contacted key figures within the legal system, including influential judges and bar association leaders. She also reached out to trusted media outlets, ensuring that footage of Grayson's behavior would reach the public quickly. Bondi understood the power of transparency. Once people saw how Grayson treated Caroline, they wouldn't stand for it. Within minutes of Grayson's removal, reporters began flooding into the courtroom. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward anyone willing to speak, and the air buzzed with excitement. The story was already spreading online with headlines like, "Judge arrested mid-trial after verbal assault on young attorney," going viral across social media platforms. People everywhere were talking about Caroline Leavitt, the brave lawyer who refused to back down, and Pam Bondi, the seasoned advocate who stepped in to hold a corrupt judge accountable. As the chaos settled slightly, a senior judge from another division was called in to take over the proceedings. Judge Eleanor Martinez was known for her fairness and professionalism, and when she entered the courtroom, there was an immediate sense of relief. She wasted no time addressing the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm but reassuring, "what occurred here today is unprecedented, and I assure you that we will handle this matter with the utmost seriousness. Justice must always prevail, both in spirit and in practice." Martinez then turned her attention to Caroline. "Miss Leavitt, I understand you've faced significant challenges today. Please know that your dedication to your clients does not go unnoticed. If you need a moment to collect yourself, we can take a brief recess." Caroline nodded gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her notes. She stepped outside the courtroom for a few minutes, taking deep breaths to steady herself. When she returned, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was a fight for integrity, for fairness, and for every person who had ever felt powerless against those in positions of authority. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi addressed the crowd of reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Standing confidently at a makeshift podium, she explained what had transpired inside. "What we witnessed today was unacceptable," she declared, her voice unwavering. "No attorney, regardless of age or experience, should be subjected to personal attacks and deliberate attempts to undermine their credibility. Judge Grayson's behavior crossed every ethical boundary, and it is our duty as members of the legal community to ensure accountability." Bondi went on to praise Caroline's resilience, calling her a shining example of courage under pressure. She emphasized that the case highlighted broader issues within the justice system, particularly the need for stronger safeguards against judicial misconduct. "This isn't just about one judge," Bondi said. "It's about creating a system where everyone, lawyers, litigants, and judges alike, is held to the highest standards of professionalism and respect." Back inside the courtroom, Judge Martinez resumed the trial. With Grayson gone, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The tension that had weighed heavily on everyone earlier dissolved, replaced by a sense of hope and determination. Caroline continued presenting her case, her confidence growing with each passing minute. Without Grayson's interruptions, she was able to lay out her arguments clearly and effectively, supported by compelling evidence and heartfelt testimonies from members of the affected community. One by one, residents took the stand, sharing their stories of hardship and loss. A mother recounted how her child had developed asthma after swimming in the polluted river. An elderly man spoke about the farm he'd worked on for decades, now rendered useless due to toxic runoff. Their voices resonated deeply with the jury, many of whom wiped away tears as they listened. Even the defense team appeared visibly uncomfortable, struggling to counter the emotional weight of the plaintiff's case. Outside the courthouse, the story continued to gain momentum. Social media users rallied around Caroline, praising her perseverance and calling for systemic reforms. Hashtags like #Justice for Caroline and #Accountability in Courts trended nationwide. Legal experts weighed in, discussing the implications of Grayson's arrest and the importance of maintaining trust in the judiciary. Some criticized the slow response to previous complaints against him, while others applauded Bondi's swift action as a turning point for accountability. By the end of the day, the narrative had shifted entirely. What started as a routine trial had transformed into a national conversation about ethics, fairness, and the role of power in the legal system. For Caroline, it was both overwhelming and empowering. She realized that her battle wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing up for principles larger than herself. As she packed up her files and prepared to leave the courthouse, a group of reporters approached her. Flashing lights illuminated her face as they peppered her with questions. "How does it feel to have Judge Grayson arrested during your trial?" one asked. "Do you think this will change how young attorneys are treated in court?" Another chimed in. Caroline paused, collecting her thoughts before responding. "Today showed me that no matter how difficult things get, there are people who believe in doing what's right," she said, her voice steady. "I'm grateful for the support I've received, especially from Ms. Bondi. But more importantly, I'm fighting for the families who deserve justice. That's what keeps me going." Her words struck a chord with everyone present. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing the essence of her message. As Caroline walked away, surrounded by cheering supporters, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of optimism. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe that victory might be within reach, not just for her, but for everyone counting on her to make a difference. The days following Judge Grayson's arrest were nothing short of chaotic. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, and it dominated headlines everywhere. "Judge arrested mid-trial for misconduct," screamed one tabloid. Another read, "Caroline Leavitt, the lawyer who stood up to abuse of power." Social media was ablaze with debates, memes, and hashtags, turning what had started as a local environmental case into a national spectacle. People from all walks of life weighed in: lawyers, activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. Some praised Caroline's resilience, while others demanded sweeping reforms in the judicial system. It seemed that everyone had an opinion, but one thing was clear: the events of that day had struck a nerve. Behind the scenes, investigations into Judge Grayson's conduct were moving at lightning speed. Pam Bondi worked tirelessly, collaborating with legal experts, ethics committees, and investigative journalists to uncover the full extent of his misconduct. What they discovered was shocking. Grayson wasn't just guilty of verbal abuse during Caroline's trial. He had a long history of biased rulings, favoritism toward wealthy defendants, and outright hostility toward marginalized groups. Past EA. Complaints against him had been buried or ignored, often dismissed as petty grievances by colleagues who feared rocking the boat. But now, with undeniable evidence laid bare, there was no escaping accountability. As details emerged, public outrage grew. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the country, holding signs that read, "Justice should be blind, not biased, and no more Graysons in our courts." Law schools hosted panel discussions about judicial integrity, inviting speakers, like Pam Bondi, to share their insights. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about Grayson's downfall, further amplifying the conversation. For many, this wasn't just about one bad judge. It was about exposing systemic flaws and ensuring that such abuses of power never happened again. Back in the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Martinez took charge with a firm hand, determined to restore order and fairness to the trial. Under her guidance, the proceedings resumed smoothly, free from the toxic atmosphere Grayson had created. Caroline finally had the opportunity to present her case without fear of ridicule or interruption. Her arguments flowed seamlessly, supported by irrefutable evidence and heartfelt testimonies from the community members affected by the corporation's actions. Each witness painted a vivid picture of the devastation caused by years of unchecked pollution, contaminated water, destroyed livelihoods, and shattered dreams. One particularly powerful moment came when a young girl named Mia took the stand. Barely 10 years old, she spoke softly but confidently, describing how her once clear river had turned murky and foul-smelling. "I used to love swimming there with my friends," she said, clutching a stuffed animal for comfort. "But now we can't go near it because it makes us sick. My mom says it's dangerous." Her words brought tears to the eyes of jurors and spectators alike. The defense team shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to refute the raw emotion behind her testimony. Outside the courthouse, the tide of public opinion continued to turn in Caroline's favor. Supporters organized rallies, raising funds for the affected community and drawing attention to the broader issue of corporate negligence. Environmental activists joined forces with legal advocates, creating a coalition dedicated to holding both corporations and government officials accountable. Caroline became an unwitting symbol of hope, a young attorney standing up to powerful forces and refusing to back down, even when faced with overwhelming odds. For her part, Caroline found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she never imagined. Reporters camped outside her office, eager for interviews. Strangers stopped her on the street to offer words of encouragement. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the sudden fame, worried that it might distract from the real issue at hand. But Pam Bondi reminded her that visibility could be a powerful tool. "Use this platform wisely," Bondi advised during one of their private meetings. "People are listening right now. If you speak up, you can spark real change." Taking Bondi's advice to heart, Caroline began using her newfound influence to advocate for reform. She gave interviews highlighting the need for stronger protections for lawyers and litigants, especially those from underrepresented communities. She called for mandatory ethics training for judges and stricter oversight mechanisms to prevent future abuses of power. Her eloquence and passion resonated with audiences, earning her invitations to speak at conferences and universities nationwide. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson's fate hung in the balance. Facing multiple charges of judicial misconduct, he was suspended, indefinitely pending a formal hearing. Legal experts predicted that he would likely lose his position permanently, along with any chance of practicing law in the future. While some argued that his punishment should extend beyond removal from the bench, others believed that the public humiliation he endured was sufficient. Either way, his career was effectively over, a stark reminder that no one, regardless of degree, title, or status, is above the law. As the trial neared its conclusion, Caroline felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was proud of how far she'd come despite the obstacles. On the other, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. Winning this case wouldn't magically fix the problems plaguing the justice system, nor would it erase the pain suffered by the community she represented. But it was a crucial step toward making things right. In her closing argument, Caroline spoke directly to the jury, her voice filled with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about holding a corporation accountable," she said, pausing to make eye contact with each juror. "It's about sending a message that greed cannot come at the expense of human lives. These families have suffered enough. They deserve justice, not tomorrow, not next year, but today. And it's your decision that will determine whether they receive it." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed out to deliberate, leaving Caroline and her clients waiting anxiously for the verdict. Outside, supporters gathered, lighting candles and holding signs of solidarity. Inside, Caroline sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about the sleepless nights spent preparing her case, the insults hurled at her by Grayson, and the unwavering support she received from Pam Bondi and the community. Most of all, she thought about the people counting on her, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for a better future. Hours passed before the jury returned with their decision. When the foreman stood up to announce the verdict, the room held its breath. "We find in favor of the plaintiffs," he declared, his voice steady and clear. Cheers erupted from the gallery as tears streamed down faces. Members of the community embraced one another, overcome with relief and gratitude. For them, this wasn't just a legal victory. It was proof that standing together could bring about meaningful change. Caroline allowed herself a brief moment of celebration, hugging her clients and thanking her team. But deep down she knew the work wasn't done. This win was important, yes, but it was also a starting point. There were still countless battles to fight, injustices to expose, and voices to amplify. As she walked out of the courtroom surrounded by cheering supporters, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice wasn't something you achieved once and forgot about. It was a lifelong commitment. And Caroline Levitt was ready to dedicate hers to the cause. The aftermath of the trial verdict was nothing short of transformative. For Caroline Levitt, for the community she represented, and for the broader legal landscape. The jury's decision in favor of the plaintiffs sent shockwaves through the nation, sparking conversations about accountability, justice, and the need for systemic reform. What had started as a local environmental case had evolved into a catalyst for change, shining a spotlight on issues that had long been ignored. For the affected community, the victory was bittersweet. They celebrated the outcome, knowing it marked a turning point in their fight for justice, but they also carried the weight of years of suffering. Many residents reflected on how their lives had changed since the pollution began, how children who once played freely by the river now stayed indoors, how crops that once thrived were now barren, and how trust in institutions had eroded over time. Yet despite these hardships, there was a renewed sense of hope. The court's ruling wasn't just a win, it was validation. It affirmed that their voices mattered, and that standing together could make a difference. Caroline spent the days following the verdict working closely with the community to ensure the settlement was implemented fairly. The corporation responsible for the pollution was ordered to pay millions in damages, fund cleanup efforts, and establish health programs for affected residents. While the financial compensation was significant, Caroline emphasized that the true measure of success would be seen in tangible improvements to people's lives. She organized town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns and priorities, ensuring that the funds were allocated in ways that addressed their most pressing needs. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Community leaders praised her not only for her legal expertise, but also for her compassion and commitment to seeing the process through. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson's downfall continued to dominate headlines. The Judicial Conduct Commission released a scathing report detailing his history of misconduct, including biased rulings, verbal abuse, and attempts to intimidate attorneys. The findings confirmed what many had suspected. Grayson's behavior during Caroline's trial was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of unethical conduct. He was formally removed from the bench and barred from holding any judicial position in the future. Legal experts hailed the decision as a landmark moment, signaling a shift toward greater accountability within the judiciary. Pam Bondi played a pivotal role in advocating for reforms to prevent similar abuses of power. Leveraging her influence and connections, she spearheaded a nationwide campaign to strengthen oversight mechanisms for judges. She called for mandatory ethics training, independent review boards to investigate complaints, and stricter penalties for misconduct. "This isn't about punishing one bad apple," Bondi said during a televised interview. "It's about creating a system where everyone, lawyers, litigants, and judges, is held to the highest standards of integrity. Trust in our courts is sacred, and we must do everything in our power to protect it." Bondi's efforts gained widespread support, with lawmakers introducing legislation aimed at implementing her proposals. Grassroots organizations joined the movement, organizing rallies and petitions to demand action. Social media buzzed with calls for change, using hashtags like Fair Courts for All and Justice Reform Now. Even schools incorporated discussions about judicial ethics into their curriculums, teaching students about the importance of fairness and accountability in the legal system. For Caroline, the attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Invitations poured in from universities, conferences, and advocacy groups eager to hear her story. She traveled across the country, delivering speeches that combined personal anecdotes with calls for reform. In each talk, she emphasized the importance of perseverance and solidarity. "No one wins alone," she often said. "Every victory requires courage, teamwork, and a willingness to stand up against injustice, even when it feels impossible." Her message resonated deeply, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. Young lawyers looked to her as a role model, proving that age or experience didn't define one's ability to create change. Activists credited her resilience for reigniting conversations about corporate responsibility and environmental justice, and ordinary citizens found solace in her story, reminded that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope and determination could prevail. Despite her growing fame, Caroline remained grounded, focusing on the work that still lay ahead. She turned down lucrative offers from big law firms, choosing instead to continue practicing public interest law. "Money isn't why I became a lawyer," she explained in an interview. "I wanted to help people, to give them a voice when they felt powerless." That mission hasn't changed. Her decision earned her even more admiration, solidifying her reputation as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. As months passed, the ripple effects of the trial became increasingly evident. Environmental regulators tightened enforcement measures, cracking down on corporations that violated pollution laws. Law schools revised their curriculums to include courses on judicial ethics and professional responsibility. And perhaps most importantly, victims of judicial misconduct gained the courage to come forward, knowing they wouldn't be dismissed or ignored. In the affected community, visible signs of progress began to emerge. Cleanup crews worked tirelessly to restore the polluted river, removing debris and treating contaminated water. Health clinics opened their doors, offering free screenings and treatment for illnesses linked to toxic exposure. Children returned to playing outside, their laughter echoing through neighborhoods once shrouded in despair. Though scars remained, the sense of renewal was undeniable. Caroline visited the community regularly, checking on their progress and offering guidance whenever needed. During one visit, she met Mia, the young girl who had testified during the trial. Now older and braver, Mia handed Caroline a drawing she had made, a vibrant picture of a clean river surrounded by smiling faces. "Thank you for helping us," Mia said shyly. Caroline knelt down, tears welling in her eyes, and hugged the girl tightly. "Thank you for being brave enough to tell your story," she replied. "That's what made all the difference." Back home, Caroline reflected on how far she had come since the early days of the trial. She thought about the insults hurled at her by Judge Grayson, the moments of doubt that had threatened to overwhelm her, and the unwavering support she received from Pam Bondi and the community. Each challenge had tested her resolve, but they had also strengthened her belief in the power of justice. She realized that this journey wasn't just about winning a case, it was about proving that integrity, empathy, and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. As she prepared for her next project, a class action lawsuit against another polluting corporation, Caroline felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Countless people believed in her mission and stood ready to support her every step of the way. For Caroline Levitt, this was more than a career. It was a calling, and she was determined to answer it with everything she had. The impact of Caroline Levitt's victory extended far beyond the courtroom, leaving a lasting legacy that would shape the legal landscape for years to come. What began as a single case against corporate negligence had grown into a movement, AOMB's rallying cry for justice, accountability, and reform. The ripple effects touched every corner of society, from small communities fighting for their rights to lawmakers drafting policies aimed at preventing future abuses of power. For Caroline, life after the trial was a whirlwind of activity. She became a household name, celebrated not just for her legal prowess but also for her unwavering commitment to fairness. Invitations flooded in from all directions. Universities wanted her to deliver commencement speeches, advocacy groups sought her guidance on environmental justice campaigns, and media outlets clamored for interviews. Yet despite the accolades, Caroline remained steadfast in her mission. She turned down lucrative offers from prestigious law firms, choosing instead to focus on public interest cases. "I didn't become a lawyer to chase money," she often said. "I did it to make a difference." Her decision resonated deeply with people across the country. Young attorneys looked up to her as a role model, inspired by her courage and tenacity. Law students formed study groups named after her, vowing to uphold the values she represented: integrity, empathy, and resilience. Even seasoned lawyers found themselves reflecting on their own practices, asking whether they too could do more to serve those in need. Caroline's story became a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that the law wasn't just a tool for the privileged, it was a shield for the vulnerable. Pam Bondi continued to champion reforms within the judicial system, using her platform to advocate for lasting change. Her efforts led to the establishment of independent oversight boards tasked with investigating complaints against judges. These boards operated transparently, ensuring that no complaint went unheard or unresolved. Mandatory ethics training programs were introduced nationwide, equipping judges and attorneys with the tools needed to navigate complex moral dilemmas. Bondi also pushed for legislation requiring courts to implement safeguards for litigants, particularly those from marginalized communities. Her work earned widespread praise, cementing her status as a trailblazer in the fight for justice. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred in the community Caroline had fought so hard to protect. With the settlement funds now being used effectively, tangible improvements began to emerge. Cleanup crews worked tirelessly to restore the polluted river, removing toxic waste and planting native vegetation along its banks. Fish returned to the waters and birdsong filled the air once again. Health clinics provided free medical care to residents, addressing illnesses caused by years of exposure to contaminants. Children played freely outdoors, their laughter echoing through neighborhoods that had once been shrouded in despair. One day, during one of her regular visits, Caroline attended a community event celebrating the progress made since the trial. Residents gathered near the riverbank, sharing stories of hope and renewal. Elderly farmers spoke about replanting crops, while young parents expressed gratitude for clean water their kids could drink without fear. As Caroline listened, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she had chosen this path, to give people a chance at a better life. At the heart of the celebration stood Mia, the brave girl who had testified during the trial. Now older and more confident, she approached Caroline with a wide smile and handed her another drawing. This time it depicted a thriving village surrounded by lush greenery and sparkling water. In bold letters across the top she had written, "Thank you for giving us our home back." Caroline hugged Mia tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. "You're the real hero," she whispered. "Without your courage, none of this would have been possible." Beyond the immediate community, the trial sparked broader conversations about environmental justice and corporate responsibility. Activists drew inspiration from Caroline's success, launching campaigns to hold other polluters accountable. Schools incorporated lessons about the case into their curriculums, teaching students about the importance of standing up for what's right. Social media buzzed with stories of individuals taking action in their own communities, proving that grassroots movements could drive meaningful change. Even the legal profession underwent a cultural shift. Judges became more mindful of their conduct, aware that unethical behavior wouldn't go unpunished. Attorneys adopted new strategies to ensure their clients' voices were heard, drawing on lessons learned from Caroline's approach. Law schools revised their programs to emphasize ethics and professionalism, preparing future generations to uphold the highest standards of integrity. As months turned into years, Caroline continued to take on challenging cases, each one fueled by the same passion that had driven her initial fight. From battling discriminatory housing policies to advocating for workers' rights, She tackled issues that others deemed impossible to win. Her reputation grew, but so did her humility. She never forgot the lessons she had learned, that justice required patience, teamwork, and an unshakable belief in doing what's right. One evening, as she sat in her modest office reviewing files for a new case, Caroline reflected on how far she had come. She thought about Judge Grayson's insults, Pam Bondi's intervention, and the countless late nights spent preparing arguments. Each moment had shaped her journey, teaching her resilience and reinforcing her purpose. She realized that while victories were important, the true measure of success lay in the lives she touched along the way. That night, as she walked home under a starlit sky, Caroline felt a profound sense of peace. She knew there would always be battles to fight, injustices to confront, and systems to challenge. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Countless people believed in her mission and stood ready to support her. For Caroline Levitt, this wasn't just a career, it was a calling, and she was determined to answer it, one case at a time until justice truly prevailed for all.